Welcome to the second season finale of Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and we are today examining Doomsday, the season 2 finale of the revival era, and the final regular episode featuring Rose Tyler.
Mm-hmm.
This is a landmark episode for the show. It's the first time we ever see Daleks and Cybermen meet each other.
Yeah.
Which, like many things with this story, I wish was a bigger focus.
Yeah,
It sort
it's
of goes
weird.
back to what we were talking about with Army of Ghosts, right? Where there's a whole bunch of different stories here, and none of them are particularly fleshed out or expanded upon. They work well enough together, but it's still a little disappointing to see because, like, the first 5 minutes of this story really hypes up Daleks versus Cybermen, and then it spends 20 minutes setting up the Daleks' plan. Then it spends 5 or 10 minutes with the Doctor ending both the Daleks and the Cybermen plans, and then the last 10 minutes is our Rose goodbye sequence. And, like, while you're watching it, you don't really notice this because, like, as a whole, the story works.
Yeah.
But it's weird how disconnected it all is.
Yeah, a little bit. I think the whole Daleks on Cybermen violence, it is a bit squandered, I guess, because you're thinking, oh, the two greatest enemies. We're really going to see, the big conflict. And again, as I said earlier when we looked at Army of Ghosts, as Dalek Sex says, it's pest control. Yeah. So it's literally 4 Daleks sweeping away the ants. Which is funny in its own way, and it's very consistent, I think, with how the Daleks are characterized generally, and especially in the revival era, because they are presented as these sort of rolling, unstoppable mini tanks. But you kind of want more of it, in its own way. But I don't mind it overall because I think the other stuff in it is really good and interesting, and I kind of I understand why RTD wanted to sort of sweep it aside to focus more on the world building and the characterization, and given how quickly it gets swept aside, it's handled really, really well. I think at the very least, given how disappointing it could have been, given that Dalek and Cyberman conflict, it's resolved very quickly. Good God, that could have been so much worse. That could have, no one, as far as I know, not many people come out of this story saying, man, I really just wish there was just more war between Daleks and Cybermen. Who cares about all that great characterization and the world building in there? No, just give me more semi-robot versus semi-robot violence.
Yeah, exactly.
The fact that it's not remembered like that, I think, proves that it's handled well, given how badly it could have been.
Sure, but I mean, at a certain point, you're kind of does it at any point leave you wondering, well, why did they put the Daleks in the story in the first place? Does this story work as well if it's just about the Cybermen? Because the conflict doesn't, and especially the resolution, it doesn't change with the Daleks' involvement. Like, the Doctor's plan is still the same without the Daleks.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, he would have, thrown all the Cybermen back into the void anyway, so
yeah,
I guess that makes sense. I mean, maybe the fact that the sphere is one of, like, the final key things that tears the fabric of reality apart, but then again, maybe you could have just said the same thing about, there being too many Cybermen, right? It's like, oh no, there weren't 5 million Cybermen, there were actually, like, 12 million, and that's what caused it. So you'd think that they wouldn't, like, there would have been a way to write around that, I suppose.
But I suppose what this does at the end of the day is it sets up the Daleks for future appearances. It takes, and not permanently, but it takes the Daleks out of that they're all dead state.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes, okay, well, how did these four survive? They were outside of time and space. That makes enough sense.
Yeah.
How did they get out of the situation? They temporal shift. That also makes enough sense. It makes it so that every time we see them in the future, we don't have to go, and now let's invent a new way that more Daleks survive the Time War so we can do Dalek stories.
Because
it puts in the legwork for that ahead of time.
because the Cult of Skaro, they show up in the next Dalek story,
They
don't
do,
they?
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that makes sense. But in a way, and that's another element that doesn't get explored too much, the fact that they're the Cult of Skaro and the fact that they, are meant to be Daleks with imaginations, that doesn't really integrate into the plot that much. They're basically just doing what most Daleks would normally do in this story.
Yeah,
As you say, it's more a setup for
it
evolution of the
is.
Daleks with the
And
human Dalek hybrid.
yeah, and that element is certainly more expanded upon there. But also, what I think adding that little element of flavor, it gives them a reason to be the Daleks that got to be in the void. Like, there's a
Yeah,
reason
yeah.
why they.
It's part of the tapestry of the world building, I suppose.
Yeah, certainly. It's why they were either chosen to or thought to enter the void ship and escape the Time War.
Yeah. Plus, you get
Um,
all that great sass.
yes, you do. Yeah, yeah. And I think like one of the most iconic sequences of the entire season
Mm,
is when the Daleks and the Cybermen meet for the first time,
yeah,
talk smack against each other. And obviously, the more memorable moments are when the Daleks dish it out. But the
yeah,
Cybermen get handled on their own pretty effectively as well.
mm,
Like, they're the ones that trick the Daleks into identifying first,
yeah,
and then they're able to say, "Well, we know you don't have elegance. Look at
yeah.
you."
This is
You know,
obvious. Yeah,
yeah, they're able to dish it out as well as they're able to take it, which I
yeah,
think is pretty fun to
yeah,
watch. So this episode, out of 208 votes, has a 7.7 on the timescales. It's only zero point 0.1 above where Army of Ghosts was a couple of weeks
mm,
ago, which
yeah,
again is very surprising to me because I know that people rave about this story.
yeah. I honestly, and I do like it more than Army of Ghosts. I mean, I
Mm.
think I said this when we reviewed Army of Ghosts, but yeah, like watching Doomsday again, it just reminds me. Yeah, I do enjoy this more. Maybe it's just because all of those plot elements are sort of coming together, but
Mm.
overall, yeah, I do think it's stronger and certainly should be higher than a 7.7.
Yeah, I forgot to mention this last time, but it's the I gotta count 1, 2, 3, 4. It's around like the 15th highest 10th Doctor story, like with this and Army of Ghosts. It's falls around there.
Huh. Where what sits above and below it?
Well, it's actually interesting. In between Doomsday and Army of Ghosts is Gridlock, which is fun. Um, but above this story is Fires of Pompeii, and just below this story is Partners in Crime. So it sandwiches the first two episodes of series 4.
Right.
Fires of
That's
Pompeii is a 7.8. You're crazy.
I don't remember a lot of that. So I mean, I remember watching it, but it's been
Yeah.
ages. Has that got Peter Capaldi in it?
Yes, that's the one.
Yes.
And Karen Gillan.
Right. Um. Yeah. I remember watching it on TV and kind of enjoying it. This is when it premiered.
Sure.
Um. But yeah, it's been a long time, so I'll trust your knowledge of the Fires of Pompeii more than mine. Um.
I think it's just a testament, isn't it, to how good this run on the show was.
Yeah.
Um,
You. Mm,
yeah, just the fact that there are like so many bangers that the Tenth Doctor spit out. That
yeah.
this one of the most well-known stories of his run is like considered mid-tier.
Yeah, like this is a companion departure. This is
Yeah,
you
as
know
well.
we've been essentially building up to this for almost like 2 years.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so it is kind of wild that it's considered yeah mid, by comparison. I
Well, to put
mean
it in perspective, this story is only currently ranked zero point 0.6 higher than the Power of the Doctor. And
uh
when you put it like that, you can understand why I'm like, hang on, why is this so low?
yeah sorry. So are you saying the Power of the Doctor got a 7?
It's currently sitting at around a 7.1, which is fascinating because I don't think it had that rating when we looked at it.
Yeah, it wasn't like 6 point.
I think it was around a 6, yeah, when we first examined it.
Um, I mean I
Because
don't think.
according to timescales, Power of the Doctor has gotten better with time, which I would argue is not the case.
Yeah, I don't think it's I certainly don't think it's a 7, but
No.
that's a whole separate discussion. Yeah, it is kind of strange that Doomsday sort of ranks as low as it does. And the funny thing is, like you say that how great the 10th Doctor's run was, which is true. And I think as this series goes on, and as this Doctor's era goes on, I think you can see RTD really finding his feet, and especially in terms of those broader story arcs. I think they do get kind of better as the years progress.
Well, I think that's
But
also evident by the fact that of the top, hang on, let me just bring this up again because I want to be accurate with this.
sure.
Uh, of the top, uh, let's say 15 10th Doctor stories, only like 3 of them are from Series 2.
Right.
There's quite a bit of Series 4, quite a bit of Series 3,
Yeah.
and like
I mean, that sounds
snippets
about
of
right.
Series 2 in here, which, yeah, I mean, that makes sense as well. I think
Yeah.
I once had someone, like, one of my mates, when they were doing a watch back, they were like, I'm surprised at how little I liked David Tennant when he was with Rose. I think that
Mm,
might have just been during like he may have just said that
mm,
to mean during Series 2. I don't think
mm.
he specifically had a problem with Rose.
Yeah, sure.
But then, like, how much the character became what he thinks of as the 10th Doctor during Series 3 and 4 when Martha and Donna were there.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think there are a
Well, I
lot
think,
more sort of
mm,
reflexive episodes in later seasons, whether it be, Human
when
Nature and Family of Blood and whatnot.
yeah, well, I think it just makes sense as well that they figure out his character a little later on, and it's not
Sure.
incredibly clear initially. To the point where I remember when we watched Fear Her, we were like, he's acting like Matt Smith's Doctor in this.
Yeah, they're still, even this far in, they weren't quite as sure, which is strange because I feel like they had more, like the writers had more certainty on who Eccleston was
Hmm.
earlier on, and
Well,
he
I
only
think
got one season.
that might just be because they had a well defined arc for that Doctor
Yeah,
immediately.
that's true. They had a
Um,
pretty solid arc for that one.
yeah, they went into that series not expecting a second season initially, so they were like, we have
Yeah,
to do a
yeah. Okay, that will
fully
make.
compact and certain story arc with this guy, and
Yeah,
especially because they knew he was coming off of the Time War.
yeah. Well, I
But then
mean,
when they regenerated Eccleston and they had to make a new Doctor, they were like, okay, we'll make him lighter, but we're not sure how much lighter yet. So
hmm,
there's like this throughout the second season, we've had like, in Fear Her when he doesn't remember that it's not common etiquette to put your finger in someone's jam jar inside their own kitchen. But
hmm,
then when you swing back to things like the Christmas Invasion when he straight up murders a guy by throwing a tangerine and letting him fall off a spaceship.
hmm,
It's they didn't quite get him right until like early season 3. I want to say
yeah.
that's when they really solidified who the 10th Doctor is.
Well, even that question that we talked about before with
Mm,
the Christmas Invasion, what kind of man am I?
yeah,
Um, that I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's them being meta or just being on the nose, but you could argue that they still struggled with that a little bit throughout this season, and it wasn't really until season 3 that they started to really find out who this character was,
yeah,
which is interesting. And again, it could just be a symptom of the fact that RTD wanted a more long-term thing with this character because
yeah,
Eccleston was only going to be there for a season. So yeah, whatever the reason is, he's not as well defined um, as you would be in later seasons. And I have to say, and it'll be interesting, sort of comparing our scores from the first season. But
yeah,
I honestly I haven't loved this season as much as the first one, and I think I'd certainly haven't loved it as much as when I first watched it as a kid. Um, and I mean, like obviously we've spent a while reviewing it, so all the
yeah.
details of why that is there. But um, I remember enjoying the season a lot more when I was younger. So
Well, it's interesting.
mm,
Season 1 has higher highs and lower lows. Like
mm,
season 1 has Dalek and Parting of the Ways, which we both, and also Empty Child and Doctor Dances, both of which
yeah,
we ranked incredibly highly. But it
yeah,
also has Boomtown, both of which
mm,
we reviled.
mm,
Nothing in season 2 quite hits those lows, but likewise, we haven't really had much that hits those heights. I
yeah,
think the only nines we've given out for season 2, I've got the stats here. I've been cataloging them for some time. Uh, we gave Impossible Planet and Satan Pit are 9, and that's
Yep.
it.
Yep.
That's the only 9 we've given out this season so far.
Yeah,
Most of it has fallen around like the 7s to
5 to
6,
7,
7,
I
6, and
think.
5 range. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we had Idiot's Lantern, and that's a whole other thing.
Well,
But yeah, I think that your observation there is generally correct. That um, it's sort of the quality control. Well, maybe not quality control, but our perception of the quality for this season is more averaged out a little bit.
yeah.
Um, I'm not sure what that is. Whether that's just how you and I maybe have changed over the last few years since we watched it when we were younger. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was surprised how, even though this is a fairly solid season, I'm surprised how little I enjoyed the stories. I think,
Well, it's
even
interesting, isn't it?
individually.
Because a couple of times now on this podcast, one of our regular guests, Sam, has often said that season 3 is the weakest of the Tennant seasons.
Mm,
And I can see what she means, because the first half of series 3 is it's full of like good to meh episodes, but then the back half
mm,
of season 3, like the last 6 episodes, are all bangers.
yeah,
She doesn't particularly like the finale, but I guess we'll figure out where we land on that when we get there.
yeah. I remember enjoying it, but yeah,
Me
we'll have to
too.
wait and see.
I generally think that like the 3 Tennant seasons, like they just go from good to great to amazing.
Yeah,
But I guess we'll figure out what we feel about that in time, especially now that we've come to this sort of weird conclusion about the series 2 that I don't think either of us had before. Where it's like, yeah, I guess it was fine.
yeah,
Um, but let's get back. Well, going back to Doomsday really quick. This
yeah.
episode
Sure.
has a 7.6 for plot. I think I described it earlier as it's 25 minutes of setting up what the stakes are, and then 10 minutes of sorting it out, then 10 minutes of a conclusion. So
Mm,
I guess in terms of plot, it's not amazingly strong, but like the beats that it shows us are good.
mm.
I don't know. There's because it's not one of those like it's not a parting of the ways kind of story where it's like this is all about the Doctor in the same position as at the end of the Time War, having to make the same choice from before. This
Mm.
is just like, okay, end of the world level threat on 2 counts. I've got to deal with both at the same time while also saving another parallel world. Like the, I don't know, like because the stakes are obviously higher because there's 2 worlds in jeopardy. But
Yeah.
I weirdly feel like this is more, um, been there, done that than it was in Parting of the Ways. I guess it's maybe just because
Yeah. No. No. No.
we've seen Cybermen before, we've seen Daleks before, and
Yeah.
neither side are doing anything particularly
It's
new here.
no. I understand what you mean. I think it's essentially a fairly standard Doctor Who invasion story. It
Mm,
just happens to be broadening the expanse of that tension, to 2 worlds and to sort of reality in general, because as the Doctor says,
yeah,
you can't keep, going back and forth between universes. That's not how this works. Um,
yeah. But I think it's also you add in the Dalek and Cybermen element, as well as having already set up that it's Rose's goodbye episode.
mm,
They do quite a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of getting the plot over the line, because the whole time you're kind of like, okay, we know Rose has said she's going to die. Who's going to get it? Is it a Dalek or a Cyberman? As it turns out, it's neither, and it's not the first time that Revival Who will fake out a companion death, which is a whole other kettle of fish.
I have to
Um,
say, I'll just say this quickly, and I should have said it yesterday. I find that intro saying, "Oh, this is the story of how I died." I find it really annoying.
Me too.
I'm going to say and the weird thing is they could have done it slightly more interestingly by saying this is the official record of how I died. May not have been great, but it would have
Yeah,
been a little bit more clever than
I mean,
what we got.
if you phrase it like that, you telegraph your ending. I think a little bit, where it's like people are going to think she's dead, but she's not. Um, And like I said,
Yeah,
it's not the
maybe.
first time the show. It's not the last time rather the show's going to do this. It does the same thing with Donna.
Mm.
Clara's companion exit is also a fake out death. It's just annoying.
They
I wish
also they also
companions would
did
actually die.
they also did fake out deaths with Rose earlier at the end of Bad Wolf, and they
Yeah.
also, in a way, kind of did it with Tennant in I don't know why I'm forgetting this. The final, help me out here. The first Davros story of the revival. I don't know why I'm forgetting the name.
Oh, Stolen Earth.
Yes, at the end of Stolen Earth. So kind of annoying that became a bit of a pattern, but oh
Yeah.
well.
8.4 for acting. Yeah, 100% agreed. Everyone across the board is doing a great job here.
Yeah, I can't think of really a single bad performance. I mean, I I would want to rate it a bit higher, but like there's no like
There are no.
soul shaking performances
Yeah.
that are coming out that are all just really, really solid. Now,
Yeah.
that might be partly because of the writing, but I think like if there are, great examples of Doctor Who performances in the Pantheon, and I'm talking like mind blowing ones, they're not here. But because of how solid they are across the board, yeah, I wouldn't give it anything lower than an 8, certainly.
Yeah. 7.9 for effects. Again, this falls into a similar category as Army of Ghosts did. It's not terribly distracting whenever they use a CGI effect, but it's not terribly convincing either.
Well, it's interesting. It reminds me of something I mentioned in regards to Boomtown, and it's the bit where um Margaret,
Yeah.
when she's running away and the teleport thing keeps malfunctioning, and I said how unbelievably goofy that was because of how cliched the sound effect was.
Yeah.
When you contrast it to this episode and the bit where the Daleks and the Cybermen are fighting for the first time and the Cybermen are firing their lasers at the Dalek,
Mm-hmm.
the sound effects they're using and the visuals they're using, there's I don't know if I'd call them like super cliche, but I'm pretty sure I've heard those sound effects before, and the visuals are even very sort of cartoonish, almost to like a comic book degree. But the
Yeah.
reason why I point that out is because it is kind of goofy, but it's not as poorly considered as that moment in Boomtown is. And this is something I've talked about before with RTD. In his era, he does, I think, sort of play up the campiness quality to it. But by now, it may not be perfect, but you can see him getting a better understanding and a better grasp of how to incorporate this campiness into the storytelling. Because even if it is a little bit weird and hokey, I still found that moment pretty believable.
Yeah.
And so even the way these visual and really sound effects are being used, even if it's not like super cutting edge or if it looks like it's aged not terribly well by modern standards, it's being deployed in a more precise way than it was previously, and I think that's quite commendable, actually.
I think the only sequence that I think is like not particularly strong from a CG standpoint is when all the Daleks are flying into the void. Um, especially in moments where we're inside Torchwood Tower and it's very clear that the Daleks are like very low rendered, almost like PNGs being like
Yeah,
shoved into the thing. It doesn't look terribly good, but
yeah,
beyond that, it's all fine, I guess.
yeah. There's nothing terribly shocking,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not like thing is like there's obviously a fair bit of CGI and special effects in this, but
Oh yeah.
given how apocalyptic it could have been more reliant on the CGI.
Oh yeah.
And it's kind of good that that it isn't.
7.8 for replay value. Sure, it's
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. I'd say like it didn't get worse on a rewatch, but I don't think
yeah.
it got like much better. It basically stayed the same for me.
I think the problem with this two-parter in general is that it's largely reliant on the spectacle of it all. Um,
Yeah,
the idea that it's the Daleks and the Cybermen and they're meeting for the first time and
yeah,
they're fighting each other and humanity's stuck in the middle. And also Rose is like leaving the show and it's all going to be super dramatic and sad. And I don't think any of that stuff holds up as well on a rewatch because there's not a lot of thematic depth to a lot of it
yeah,
underneath.
sure.
Unlike Parting of the Ways, where like I said, it's so rich and stoked and it's so deep with character complexity and
Yeah,
all that stuff. And then on top of that, when you watch this episode again with RTD's whole era in mind, it's hard to be entirely sad during the final scene because you've always got in the back of your mind, well, in 2 seasons from now, she's going to get her own Doctor clone and she's going to be happy anyway. So it's not as sad anymore as it once was.
Would you say that
I don't entirely subscribe to that idea because it's still sad in the moment, but
yeah,
I understand
sure.
the argument.
Yeah. Would you say that this is certainly the weakest RTD finale?
I mean, I would say so. I think that Last of the Time Lords is better than this. I again, that's from having not seen it in a while, and I know certain Sam Sweetings that might disagree with that. But just in general, I think that Last of the Time Lords is such a good Martha episode.
Yeah.
But this isn't a particularly good Rose episode.
Right. I think again, obviously we'll get to it when we get to it. But the Last of the Time Lords, I do certainly remember enjoying more than this. There seem to be. It's weird, but there seem to be higher stakes in this story than in Last of the Time Lords because it's two different universes and potentially almost all of reality. But I felt there's more emotion in Last of the Time Lords in terms of the stakes.
Definitely.
And then, of course, you've got the really good characterization between the Doctor and the Master, which is a whole other thing. Whereas here, as we kind of said, the whole, the villains of this story, the Daleks and the Cybermen, I don't know if I'd say they get completely squandered, but they certainly don't get as utilized as they could be. So yeah, I think in the fullness of time, this story may prove to be the weakest RTD finale. Having said that, if this is the weakest, it's still pretty damn good.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, like, if this, as we keep saying, if this is the worst it gets, that's a fantastic resume. And 98 out of 106 people say this story requires a previous. I can only assume that those 8 people who didn't forgot this option exists on the timescales, because no, you definitely need more than this.
Yeah, for sure. Like there's so much.
Yeah, this is 2 seasons of build up, as you said before, to get to this point.
Not to mention how crucial the whole interdimensional thing is to the plot, and how that was already established in Rise of the Cybermen, Age of Steel. You get the impression of the Daleks and the Cybermen pretty well. Like the characterizations of them are actually like really good to the point where, I mean, I certainly wouldn't want this to be a first, Doctor Who story, but you understand who they are pretty well.
Oh yeah, that's what I was. That was one of my main thoughts as I was watching this story. It was, by God, Russell T Davies just understands the Daleks so well.
He does.
He writes them fantastically.
Yeah, even things like, obviously there's the the back and forth between the Cyber Leader and Dalek Sec, and it's like that's so enjoyable. I've written here, I'll never get over the discussion between Dalek Sec and the Cyber Leader. It's just bar after bar, man. Like it's so enjoyable. Yeah, we would everything like from this is pest control. We would destroy the Cybermen with one Dalek. You are better at dying. It just classic lines. These have become kind of immortalized, really.
Yeah, certainly.
That the fact that RT is able to write the Daleks in a way that's very, very funny, but also very compelling, and where even if he's kind of winking at the audience and you're kind of laughing at them, they never become goofy in that moment. You still take them really seriously because you realize, you know what? Yeah, they probably could wipe out 5 million Cybermen with 4 Daleks and war with one of them.
But it's also the contrast of going from that moment where they're rightly treating the Cybermen as if they were ants, but then as soon as they hear the Doctor's name, they all freeze.
They're terrified.
And they're instantly scared. It's so good and so great. And it's one of the many ways that Russell T Davies demonstrates that he not only understands the show, but respects the show's history.
Yes.
The well-defined Dalek Doctor dynamic that has persisted over, by this point, 43 years of the show is so incredibly well understood. It's the way the Doctor freezes in horror when he first sees them on the screen
Yeah,
and
that was a
doesn't
really
say
good
anything.
moment.
Yeah, that moment, but then combined with the way that he's treating them when he's in the room with them face to face, how
Yeah.
he's sort of acting jovial and sort of
Mm.
laughing at them
Yeah.
just as a way to like cover his own latent fear regarding what these things can do.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah, and I think there's another small bit with the Daleks characterization that I do really appreciate. When Dalek Sec tells Rajesh to kneel,
Yeah,
that works because that seems like a Dalek thing to do because they're so obsessed with their own superiority
yeah,
that you can imagine that they would want, supposedly lesser beings to bow before them. But then there's a twist because it's revealed that the only reason they're doing that is for the purpose of utility in order to extract his brainwaves. And the reason why
yeah,
it works so well is because even though there's a subversion there, neither of those elements are contradictory. They are both, maniacal and egotistical and unbelievably arrogant in their supposed superiority, but they are
yeah.
also very cold-blooded and calculating.
Yeah,
So,
but then it's that exchange, but then leading into you didn't have to kill him,
yeah,
neither did we need him
we need
alive.
him alive.
That
It all, again, it just,
he's I it's so great to see the Daleks written this way,
yeah,
and it's something that we don't really get to see very much after the RTD era in Revival Who.
yeah. I
And I
mean,
think a
mm,
huge part of that is also just giving the Daleks names, right?
mm,
Allowing them to have these sort of, uh, you know, distinct personalities that can be attached to a name. My thought
mm,
as I was watching this episode was like, I imagine that Nicholas Briggs was so happy when he read the script for the first time and saw the Daleks had names. He was like, okay, cool. I don't have to track which Dalek voice I'm using for which Dalek line. They've
yeah,
got names, so I can just assign each name a voice. It's made my job so much easier.
yeah, for sure. Um, And again, it goes back to, as you say, that the fact that RTV understands who these characters are and knows
Yeah.
how far to push the canon before, without completely breaking it.
Mm.
Which is really great.
It's also interesting that RTD understands that the Daleks would never align themselves with the Cybermen, and then both showrunners after him would have them do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
I
Wait,
mean,
when did?
Moffat, it was in the Pandorica where all of the
Okay, yeah,
Daleks and the
yeah. I was
enemies
gonna say.
aligned to trap him, and that moment makes enough sense.
Yeah,
But
I'd
then
agree
Chibnall
actually.
decided to put Daleks and Cybermen together to work for the Master just for no reason.
Hmm. Yeah, it's
They didn't need to be in Power of the Doctor. That story sucks.
it really does. I must say, I'm very keen to see what RTD does with the Daleks in, this new era that we've
Mm.
got coming up. I'll be very, very excited to see how that works out. Um, but yes, anyway, point is, yes, good characterization of the Daleks, and even though arguably the characterization of the Cybermen isn't quite as intricate in this story, it's still done pretty well. Like you said, they managed to get that little jab in of like, yeah, you obviously aren't elegant. We can see
Yeah.
that. So, it's all good fun.
I noticed that they once again throw in a "You will become like us"
Yeah,
line, which is always good to see.
yeah,
Um,
quite. Mm,
real quickly, as something that we didn't touch
sure.
on last time with Army of Ghosts, um,
No,
the amount that Mickey's character has progressed since his last appearance is staggering.
I was gonna say, I like his character progression really. I think throughout sort of both seasons, but particularly this season, I think it really comes to a head in this story. Even just that small moment when in Army of Ghosts when he's putting his finger to his lips, telling Rose to keep quiet. Like there's such a you get the feeling like, okay, this guy's really been around the block. He knows how this works, and he
Yeah.
knows how, even in a way, to have fun in this weird, terrifying crisis
Well,
situation.
he's finally got confidence.
Yeah, which is great. I think that's the thing that really sticks. And even like the thing that I've written here is it's nice to see the Doctor and Mickey become friends. Here Mickey's character arc is complete as the Doctor has found a genuine respect for him. So
Yeah.
even the Doctor is able to acknowledge, okay, yeah, he's not Mickey the idiot. He's been around the block and he you know, he's, I don't know how to phrase it, like up to snuff, I suppose.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
although,
He's
or perhaps more accurately, that the potential for greatness.
yes,
Which is something he maybe always had, but people discounted. Now we totally see it to the point where even the Doctor is forced to acknowledge it.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, which is really quite
Um,
good.
Pete's back in this as well.
Yep,
Something
pretty.
that I something that I always found
Mm,
was interesting is in Rise of the Cybermen and Age of Steel. The one thing the Doctor kept saying to Rose over and over again is, "That's not your dad. That's a different Pete Tyler." But
yep.
here he's completely flipped,
Mm,
and he's now going, "You know that she's your daughter, right?" Or like, Jackie Tyler, her husband died as well. That's a
yeah,
nice match for you, right?
yeah.
She's not my wife. I was at the funeral. You got a name wrong.
Hmm.
It's so interesting that he's on a dime has decided to completely change his entire philosophy from a previous episode.
Well, you say on a dime, but I do think it's more part of the fabric of his character arc because I've had several episodes, between this and Rise of Cyberman and Age of Steel, in which he's had to be confronted with loss and loneliness a bit more. So maybe it's part of him confronting with those problems in himself. Maybe there was like, oh, I don't know. Maybe in a way he was trying to say to Rose, like, oh, all my family, my species is dead. You don't just get to go to a new universe and find a new family. That's not how it works,
Mm.
as mean-spirited as that sounds.
Well, I
But
think
maybe...
I also interpreted it
Mm,
slightly as more like by this point in this episode, he probably already has the plan to close the rift by opening it up and letting everything
mm,
get pulled through.
yeah,
So I think he must have like by the time he finds out that alternate Torchwood has developed reality hopping technology, he's probably already formulated in his head, this is the plan, and I've got to make sure that Rose isn't here because she'll die. So
yeah,
I'm going to make sure that she's safe on Pete's world.
yeah, that's true.
With Pete and Jackie will
Mm,
probably want to go as well, so there'll be a happy family there. Like he's
yeah,
probably worked through that by this point, whereas in Rise of the Cybermen, there's no way he could have known this was going to happen.
no,
So he would
yeah, no,
want
that's true.
Rose to not
That's very true.
chase, something that isn't hers.
Sure, yeah. No, that makes sense. That's I think either interpretation works,
Yeah,
but it probably is more this is what the Doctor's planning to do in this episode.
yeah. But it's interesting seeing Pete basically leading the charge.
Mm,
I mean, that's where they set him up with in Age of Steel.
mm,
But I guess it's interesting to see the follow through on it as well, and his arc in this episode around accepting Rose as his daughter, even though he's not her dad.
yeah,
It's really nice to see.
yeah, yeah. It's quite narratively satisfying.
Yeah, and the reunion scene between Pete and Jackie is incredibly well written.
Yeah. How rich?
Yeah,
Very. I don't care about that. How very?
yeah.
No, but the funny thing is,
It's just the build up, right, of them just
mm,
engaging in small talk a
mm,
little bit, and it's like you
yeah,
get shades of the people that they once loved reunited again, but like not quite sure how to process actually
mm,
seeing it, to the point where Pete is still like, "You're not her," but then eventually just relents and goes, bollocks to that. Come here, please. I love you, my wife.
yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing because that moment when she asks how much money he's made,
Hmm.
that's kind of like alternate Jackie, because alternate Jackie is a lot more shallow than
Yes.
um you know our world Jackie, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
So that's consistent. So that might be why Peter's laughing. But I've got a mild, slight theory here, and maybe I'm reading too much into it. But when um Jackie's asking, how rich she is, maybe it's not so much her feeling sort of envious and thinking, oh wow, this guy is loaded.
Hmm.
Um, like it's not just a joke. It's her thinking, oh, so in this universe, he was happy and he succeeded. He got to live a full, fulfilling life. That's really great.
Yeah. There's probably an
So
element of that there. Yeah.
yeah. So again, maybe I'm reading too much into that, but that's my theory on it.
Well, I mean, it's probably both, right? Because in the
Mm,
first time we see Jackie, huge part of most of what she does in the first episode is nag Rose about seeking compensation for her work being blown up. So, that at the very least is a small part of her character on this earth as well. It's just
Yeah, sure.
it's just more coming from a place of we live in a flat on the Powell estate. I want more for my daughter than she's currently got, as opposed to I live in a mansion. It's not enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is a nice conflict that they have, and it's very small. But when Rose goes back to be with the Doctor, and they have their little the moment of heightened tension between the two, where it's like, she's my daughter, she's our daughter. Well, no, she's just your daughter. I'm protecting my Earth and my Earth alone. If Rose wants to go there, that's on her. But I've got no obligation to her. And it's a really dramatic moment that is really only a minor part of the episode. I'm glad they don't dwell on it too much because it telegraphs too much that Pete's going to come back and save her. But it's really, really, especially right after their big reunion, to see them immediately at odds again. It's kind of like, okay, so we're back to this, right? In Father's Day, all we see them do is argue. They're arguing in Rise of the Cybermen as well. And so we're right back into the argument again, but then like to see how quickly they resolve it, it's like no, okay, they are not the same people as they once were, and they are improved, and they're working with it, working on it now.
Yep, for sure. Do you want to talk about the Doctor?
Sure.
Yeah. So I think, given how much this story is doing, because it's doing quite a lot, and how high the stakes are, I really like that there's a lot of wonderful moments of really good characterization for the Doctor, not just with the ending, but small things as well, like the way and it also of course goes to David Tennant's great performance, but the way they balance humor and levity with how serious the whole situation is. It is very good at opening doors. Great understanding of the Doctor, great understanding of even of the sonic screwdriver and how that fits into the mythos.
Yeah.
So it again, those moments, it's those great sort of delicious things in writing where you're like, oh, here's where the characterization and the plot, it's all coming together, and you just gotta love it. The like another stuff where when the Doctor says, I survived the Time War by fighting on the front line, I was there at the fall of Arcadia, hopefully I'll be able to live with that at some point. And that it's a small thing, it's not focused on a lot, but it's just another little bit to add that richness to this character, which is really good. Or even
sorry, before you continue, it's really interesting that he says that as well, because I think, and I might be wrong, but before this point, David Tennant doesn't mention the Time War all that much. It's very present with the Ninth Doctor, but I think this might be one of the first times that Tennant actually brings it up. It makes sense because it's the first time he's encountered the Daleks. But it's nice to have that moment in there to show that it's, even though he's worked through most of it from his time as Chris Eccleston, it's still something that affects him.
Yeah.
Which obviously it would.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think you're right. I mean, there may have been some allusions to the Doctor's home world made throughout season 2, but no, I don't think there's ever been a direct reference to the Time War. And it probably is, like, maybe this is just part of his characterization, but if, he hadn't met the Daleks, he wouldn't be confronting that issue so directly. So it is interesting that he's put in that position. But even other small things, like earlier on when the Cyberman was like, I ordered a surrender. Why aren't they surrendering? And the Doctor's like, you're in their houses, you've got their children. What did you think was going to happen?
Of course,
and that's just that's just so great.
Yeah,
because that's something that feels like, I feel like any Doctor of any era, for the most part, would have said that. But because we've got the element of the backstory of the Time War, that kind of elevates that line for me. It makes it even richer, which is kind of great.
Yeah, well, especially the amount of times that the Doctor has tried to discourage someone from fighting Daleks or Cybermen by saying something to the effect of bullets can't stop them, or your weapons aren't going to work. But the fact that here we're showing that no, it's not that he doesn't understand why they're doing it. He knows why they would do it. It's just that he doesn't want any further casualties by having them do something that is fruitless, but he understands their mentality surrounding it, and he demonstrates that here when quite aggressively confronting the cyber leader in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and of course another
really good characterization all around, actually. Yeah,
and of course another great turn for David Tennant.
Mhm.
Really great moments, whether it's the big dramatic part, like when Rose is flying into the void, you really feel that sense of pain
Yep.
coming from Tennant, and then even small things when he sees the Daleks on the computer screen for the first time.
Yep.
It's fairly subtle, but you get that sense of fear, like genuine terror from him, which is really, really quite great. Yeah.
Let's move on to Rose.
I was gonna say,
I respect you holding me back as long as you have. But it's a departure episode. We need to talk about Rose here. I'll get this out of the way right now. Rose gets captured off trap number 18. It is so incredibly fitting that the way that she leaves the show is by getting trapped somewhere. It is so fitting that they chose to do that.
Yeah.
And obviously, it wasn't intentional, but as I've said, the majority of what she's done on the show during her time is be something for the Doctor to save. And the way that she leaves is by being something the Doctor can't save. So there's something there. But for in the lead up to that, there's quite a lot when the Doctor explains his plan. There's a lot of pushback from Rose about, I'm not going to the other world, I want to stay with you. And again, it goes back to the codependency stuff I was talking about in the previous episode. Because think about it. During the speech that she gives Jackie, she says a lot of like, for the first 19 years of my life, I lived with you and it was fine. But then I met the Doctor and he showed me all this stuff. But then it transitions to, and he does it all alone. He's got no one, but not anymore. Now he's got me.
Yeah.
That's not the same thing as character growth. What would have been character growth is her saying, for the first 19 years of my life, I lived with you and it was fine. But then I met the Doctor and he showed me I was capable of so much more.
Yeah.
But there's none of that. And it's all just centered around, I need to be with the Doctor for him.
Doesn't she actually say in this episode that, like, I'm going to be, like, with him forever or something like that?
She says it at the start of Army of Ghosts.
Okay, yeah. And it's
I don't think that's the same thing as, because think about it. There are people who, like, not in fiction, in real life, who think for hours and hours and agonize over the decision to move just another city over away from their birth family to be with their spouse of many years.
Yeah.
There are people who think for hours and hours and hours about that and really weigh up all the options and really consider things. And, is this something that I want to do? Is this something that is the right thing for me to do? Rose doesn't even think for a second about abandoning her entire family on a parallel world that she can never visit again. That's not a strong character. That's a codependent character. And especially when you consider that she is 20, that is too young to be making massive decisions like that and have it be framed as a good thing.
Well, it's interesting, like you mentioned quite a lot, particularly with the first season, the big theme of what the Doctor leaves behind.
Yeah.
And if she was somebody who, as you say, said, I used to go through this humdrum life, but then the Doctor showed me a new way of thinking, and now I can live out my life, that would fit into that theme. But it's not really a question of what the Doctor leaves behind, because she doesn't want to leave the Doctor. So,
and there's more shades of it in Parting of the Ways as well. Like the Rose's speech in that one is directly about, the Doctor opening my eyes to a new way of living. But here it's been regressed to, I can't leave him because I love him. Which again, at 20 years old, like it's a similar thing of like a teenager being like, well, I'm gonna move out of home, mum and dad. I'm gonna make it on my own. Like, obviously, it's not the same thing, but like,
no,
a similar kind of character decision. And I just don't think it's a healthy message to send to teenagers.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think it doesn't bother me that much, maybe because they're not like given that's your interpretation of it, they could be more explicit about that, which is
Mm.
why it's not as perhaps bad or harmful as you may think, but I do see what you mean. I mean, yeah, like as you say, the decision of her being, only being 20, and it's like, yep, I want to go to like stay in this universe and never see my family again. That's pretty. It's pretty full on.
Full on, and it's intense, especially for how
Yeah,
little she thinks about it. And that's my
yeah,
main thing. Like, she doesn't even think for a second that she's never going to see her mum again. She's
yeah,
fully content to be like, goodbye, see you later. I'm gonna go away. I'm gonna spend.
mm,
I'm choosing as a 20-year-old to spend my life with this 900-year-old man who I love, as opposed to being able to visit my family at any point because I'm
yeah,
definitely going to miss
yeah,
them. Like, can you imagine if she had stayed with the doctor? Like, how quickly would she have gone? Wait a minute, I miss my
yeah,
mom.
yeah.
Like,
Well,
this was a bad idea.
and that's the thing. Like, obviously, it's not written this way, but when you think about it, given how she's saved at the last minute by Pete and taken to the other universe, you think, well, what would have happened?
Hmm.
What would have happened if if there was a malfunction, or just Pete couldn't work the machine and get back to the other universe? What would have happened there? Well, I mean, she
Yeah,
would have gone into the void, obviously, but
it instantly killed. Yeah.
yeah, but it's still like the fact that it sort of that gets resolved as quickly as it does, and it's almost like RTD saying, "Oh, don't worry, guys, no, she stays with her parents, it's all good."
Hmm.
Um,
Well, it's obviously
but you
done to
wonder,
it's done to play up the tragedy of their separation.
yeah, and this sort of precarious sort of nature of traveling with the Doctor, I think, in a way.
Yes,
Um,
that
but as you say, given all of that, is it really good characterization?
I don't think it is.
Yeah, perhaps not. I know, like I already addressed this with Army of Ghosts. It doesn't bother me the way it does you, and I think feel like there's more room for interpretation than that, but I do certainly now see more of your point as to why Rose is not terribly written. Um,
It's
and
just
in the broader fan base, certainly, like I think she probably is a bit overrated.
well, for
Um,
me, again, it just comes back to the thing that she doesn't even for a second consider her
mm,
actions.
mm,
Like, I don't like necessarily think that making that decision. Like, there are people who would end up making that decision, just as there are people who decide to move away from their hometown to be with their
yeah,
significant other.
sure,
That's, I'm not advocating you should stay where your family is at all times. No, no, no.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
saying that any decision like that is going to impact your life indefinitely needs to be treated with the severity that it
yeah.
deserves. And
And
the
at
fact that
the
she doesn't shows me that
mm,
she's not an emotionally intelligent character.
mm,
She is just someone who globs on to the doctor
mm.
and does whatever he wants her to do.
and like also, having sort of the impetus to leave home, like if it was that quickly, um,
Yeah,
there would at least have to be more of a reason for that to happen. But Rose, she's got a loving family,
exactly. Yeah.
um,
How much of a slap in the face is that for Jackie?
yeah, which they already did sort of address in Army of Ghosts. It's like, you've changed so much, and
Yeah,
um,
I think that's part of why Jackie's monologue in that works so well because by
mm,
this point she is just kind of like, thanks for keeping me alive for 19 years, Mom. Now I'm abandoning you on
mm,
a foreign planet so I can keep traveling the stars with this person who will outlive me, even despite the fact that he's centuries older than me. And
yeah,
I love him, and I'm expecting that to be requited at some point.
mm,
It's
yeah,
but like even beyond that, like it's not a terrible episode for Rose. Even before that point, like her
mm,
interactions with the Daleks are quite good.
yeah, yeah,
Um, she's able to stand up to them in a believable way.
sure,
There is one line that I want to highlight, and it's not something that I have noticed before, but it's a little weird in context.
uh-huh,
It's after the Daleks threaten to kill Mickey if Rose doesn't open the Genesis Arc,
mm,
and she says they're gonna kill us anyway, so what the hell? Normally, in that situation, you would say they're gonna kill us anyway, so no, I'm not gonna open this thing and unleash horrors upon the world. It's a little
Yeah.
backwards. It's a little backwards to say, well, if you're gonna kill us anyway, I might as well doom everyone else too.
Yeah, it is a little weird. I mean, I think the implication is that there's, an intense curiosity, but, like, she knows what happened the last time she activated a piece of Dalek
She
technology.
more than anyone knows the dangers of the Daleks.
Yeah.
I don't think it's something that was given that much thought. It was like
No,
because
I don't think so either.
her intention in that moment is to save Mickey from being exterminated, but to follow
Yeah.
that intention up with they're going to kill us anyway,
Yeah.
it's like I don't think there was much thought put into that line by RTD.
Yeah.
Like, they clearly
Yeah.
wanted he clearly wanted to have a line demonstrating why Rose is willing to go along with it, but just like slightly got a little wrong.
A bit of a weird line, but
Yeah,
as you say, I doubt that it was terribly intentional.
no, certainly not.
I think it was just to. I mean, I'd say give Rose a badass line, but I'm not sure if that really counts. But
Yeah, I mean,
either way, as you say, it's not super
it's followed
intentional.
up. It's also followed up with her big "I killed the Dalek Emperor" speech. So that's how
That
you
is
make
true.
it badass.
Yeah, that is very true.
Yep. And the episode all culminates in that last conversation between the Doctor and Rose on Bad Wolf Bay.
Mm.
Yep. I go back and forth on this conversation because I think it does a lot of like work being like, here's what I'm gonna do now that I'm on this world. But then it ends with like realistically they both say I love you to each other. Because we know we know that's what he would have said. There's they play it off as ambiguous, but we know that's what he would have said.
Yeah.
And it just goes back to the whole Doctor companion romance thing, which neither
which
of us
we've discussed before why we find that annoying.
Yeah.
Frustrating.
Because there's nothing wrong with these two characters having a heartfelt goodbye to each other.
No, not at all.
Like she encountered the Doctor when he was at his darkest moment post Time War, and she made him better. That's explicitly stated in the text.
Yeah, which is fine.
Yeah, and while it's not a focus in this episode, it's established prior to this that the Doctor took a Rose, a person with little ambition about their future, and helped give them a new outlook on life.
Yeah, and presumably help them to grow.
Yeah, and I really just wish that was what their conversation was about.
Yeah.
I wish either of them had brought any of that stuff up, as opposed to recapping what they're going to do now and then playing up the romance.
Yep. Which, they'd been establishing that for a while at this point. I think maybe it is just one of those sort of mid-2000s TV tropes. It's just kind of annoying to see it play out. I do appreciate the ambiguity of the fact that the Doctor doesn't, or really isn't able to say anything, but and like the fact when he's crying, like that's emotionally devastating enough. But like we've discussed it before. We know what what the implication is.
Yeah, certainly.
So it is. Yeah, as you say, it works fairly effectively in a decent conclusion for the episode, but it is still annoying that was sort of the character arc that they were going for.
And I think Murray Gold's soundtrack helps get that scene across the line by the end as well, because even though I don't particularly like the content of the scene that much, when the music starts swelling and it's at its most dramatic, it does kind of get me.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. As we've said a few times now, kudos to Murray Gold. So excited he's coming back.
Yes. Well, speaking of which, I mean, this episode ends on the Donna and the TARDIS cliffhanger, which is really effective, especially because at this point, like, no one, not even the crew, knew that Donna would become a bigger character. This was just intended to be, let's get a mid-2000s British comedy icon into the TARDIS to set up the Christmas special.
Yeah.
But it's also really nice that it's sort of mirroring where we're at currently, where it's like, this is the last episode of regular Doctor Who we'll be looking at for the podcast in a while, and the next time we do so, it'll be with David Tennant and Catherine Tate in the 60th. So it's just really, really handy that it worked out this way.
It kind of is. Yeah, I mean, her entrance, like, it's iconic, really.
Yeah.
At this point.
It's just such a snap turnaround from the intense sadness of the Bad Wolf Bay scene to suddenly, what's going on? Who's this? How'd you get in here? What's going on?
and I know like this is maybe getting a bit ahead of ourselves, but it is like Catherine Tate's performance is really quite a powerhouse because not only is she
Yes.
very funny, but when she's allowed to be dramatic, it's
Yeah.
it really gets quite full on, and it's
And
good that the creators saw that potential in her. I
yeah.
think.
Well, I'm also glad because that's mostly in season 4 as well.
Yeah,
Like she
yeah,
has one or two dramatic beats in Runaway Bride, but
yeah.
it's
But it's more in
largely
season 4.
yeah. She's in Runaway Bride. She's largely there to be comedic, and she does that really well. But I'm
Yeah,
so happy that they allowed Donna to be incredibly fleshed out as a character
yeah,
by
for
bringing it
sure.
back for series 4 because she's just so good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm just really happy we get to talk about revived era companions who aren't Rose. It's like I get it. I know that my intense hatred for Rose hasn't been. I know people don't quite like. It can be annoying to hear me every episode go, "Ooh, I'm shaking my fist at 19-year-old Rose Tyler for being a bad character." Ooh, but like I'm happy that we are gonna get some variety now.
hmm.
Um, I think one of the best things the RTD era did was cycle the companions out because it meant that none of them got particularly stale. It allowed for them to tell like really good story arcs that were condensed to their individual seasons, and it also allowed the show to mix it up, which I appreciate.
Yeah. Well, it works quite well in a way because by having the human character, the companion getting recycled, it gives the season an anchor and a
Mm.
definitive way to make a story arc.
And it's an identity as well.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so that they could, focus on more of a long-term thing for the Doctor. Um,
Yes.
whereas they could have the companions definitively end their story arc at the end of that season. So,
Yeah.
it honestly, yeah, probably is, even from in terms of structure, a better decision to have a new one every season afterwards. So, yeah.
Is there any more to talk about with Doomsday specifically?
Little, tiny little things.
Hmm?
So first off, the Yvonne Cyberman. Now,
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I forgot about that. Good grief.
look. So first off, was there a reason given as to why she was able to resist the emotional inhibitors and to fight the Cybermen? Because I don't
None
remember that
whatsoever.
moment at all.
Nothing. No setup. None whatsoever.
It's just implied that she's so devoted to the job. Oh, I don't even think I've got time or the energy to unpack
For the
that, but
crown.
I did my duty for Queen and Country.
Well,
Jesus
it's
Christ.
again like it's setting up in future episodes when characters will inexplicably be able to override the Cybermen control.
Which really
Um,
makes it's very defeatist in that way. Like, it kind of defeats the purpose, especially given how much was emphasized in Rise of
yeah,
the Cybermen Age of Steel. It's like, oh, I guess if you really just believe, then you can break through it. I It doesn't make a lot of sense. And it's a
no, I
little.
don't.
And also, it kind of cheapens Yvonne's character because, as we said, yes, that whole unpleasant imperialism, that's obviously part of her character, but she's got a bit more nuance than that. But to have her story arc conclude with it was her love of the Empire that helped her break through the Cybermen's, emotional inhibition. Um, that's how it's going to end. What a great
Yeah,
idea.
it's also
Also,
just it doesn't really serve that much of a higher purpose anyway because it it's there to uh, get rid of a Cyberman threat that had been established 30
yeah,
seconds prior to its appearance.
yeah, yeah. There must have been some other way to deal with that. And the image of her crying a tear of oil. Now,
Hmm.
this goes back to what I've said about RTD really kind of playing up the campiness. Given how unbelievably goofy that could be, I was surprised how stirring it was,
Sure.
but it still doesn't look amazing. And I think it is, as I say, it's still sort of a symptom of the fact that, especially in terms of how to deploy the campiness, RTD is still trying to sort of find his feet.
Yeah.
Um, in moments like that. So it could have been a lot worse. And look, there've probably been other super goofy moments we've found even in Classic Who, but it it stuck out to me when I first saw it as a kid. It stuck out to me when I watched it years later, and it definitely stuck out to me when I watched it this time. So
Yeah, it's pretty pointless.
yeah, it's very, very strange. So the last thing I'll say, having the place where the Doctor and Rose meet for the final time being Bad Wolf Bay, again, there's a potential there for it to be too coincidental, too needlessly sentimental, but because there was groundwork laid in Parting of the Ways with, Bad Wolf getting scattered throughout the universe, it just makes sense for me.
Yes,
Like,
I
I
agree.
think, oh, maybe this is one of those moments. Maybe Rose could see into the time vortex and thought, oh, I'll put that one last little twinky dink message so that they can meet each other again.
I like that.
So,
I like that canonically makes Time Vortex Rose more powerful than the devil himself.
yeah, a little bit.
Because the devil in his episode says that Rose will die in battle, and I think that is the implication there that it's either that he was lying to get under her skin, or it's that he looked ahead in time, saw Rose's name on the list of the dead, and went aha, and isn't able to see through alternate dimensions to where she
Yeah,
actually ended up,
for sure.
which I think is funny.
Yeah, it is very funny. So yeah, the fact that it was like that, again, potential to be goofy, but that it still works. And again, this sort of you can see this is the process, I think, of RTD finding his feet,
Mm.
figuring out how to employ the campiness and the weird, and even just the weird sort of story turns that are, excuse me, part of Doctor Who. It's just interesting to see the development of his writing style and his sort of story arc style, I suppose.
Well, another thing it does,
Um,
it
mm,
makes the Rose era a lot more finite. By tying a
mm,
bow on it, by bringing up Bad Wolf again one last time,
yeah,
it
sure.
it does really cement the whole. Like it goes just a little bit further to cementing the whole. Okay, like
Mm,
she's definitely leaving. Like this isn't a thing where the Doctor's coming back to get her.
mm,
Like she's really trapped there, and to bookend her arc on the show, we'll throw in one last Bad Wolf reference for the road. It's really just like it's like a sitcom's final episode, basically like replaying the greatest hits, like
yeah,
making its final callbacks and references and catchphrases one last time for the road.
yeah. No, that makes sense. Um, I think that's about it though.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've covered it all. I am going to give Doomsday a 7.
Um, I think I'm gonna give it an 8. I feel like yeah, there are some flaws with it, but those emotional heights are so great that it sort of elevates sort of the rest of the episode. So yeah, I think I'm gonna go with an 8 for this one.
Cool. Um, this brings us to the end of season 2 of Two Who's Review. We've made
Mm-hmm.
it all the way through another season of Revival Who. Um, when you're listening to this or when we're uploading it, it's roughly the end of September. Um, as you are probably well aware, the 60th anniversary specials air in November. We will be taking a small break from uploads for a few weeks. And in the lead up to those 60th anniversary specials, we're going to be releasing a series of special episodes which don't really necessarily have a particular theme. Like, there's not going to be like an episode discussion. We're not going to jump into Runaway Bride immediately. We're going to do a few special episodes, kind of like last year when we did our let's produce a whole season of Doctor Who thing. We'll do a few of those in a similar vein leading up to the 60th anniversary specials, at which point we're going to jump back into our regular programming where we dissect an individual story.
Mm-hmm.
We have a few ideas as to what we're going to do in the interim. We're not going to reveal those to you yet.
You'll have to
Um,
wait and see.
yeah, but I'm really excited about the future of the show and of this podcast. So
Indeed.
until then, I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and I suppose if there's one last chance to say it, to Who's Review audience,